The ring sat in my jewelry box for 3 years, untouched. A delicate band of white gold with tiny diamonds circling a center stone that caught light like captured starfire. Grandma Rose had pressed it into my palm the night before she died, her fingers trembling but her grip fierce. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. "This is yours now, Micah," she'd whispered, her voice paper thin but urgent. "Promise me you'll keep it safe. Promise me you'll never let them take it." I was 22 then, fresh out of college, drowning in student loans and living in a studio apartment that smelled like the Chinese restaurant downstairs. The ring felt too precious, too heavy with history I didn't understand. So I kept it locked away, visiting it like a shrine whenever I missed her lavender perfume and the way she'd hum old jazz standards while braiding my hair. Grandma Rose had raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. She was my anchor, my compass, the woman who taught me that elegance wasn't about money, but about carrying yourself like you mattered. She worked double shifts at the textile factory, came home with fabric fibers in her hair, but still managed to make me feel like the most important person in the world. Now at 25, I was finally getting married to David, a kind accountant who loved my terrible cooking and never complained when I left art supplies scattered across our kitchen table. The wedding was small, intimate, just how we wanted it. I decided it was time to wear Grandma Rose's ring as my something old, something borrowed from the woman who'd given me everything. That Tuesday morning, I opened my jewelry box with trembling fingers, ready to slide the ring onto my finger for the first time since she died. The velvet compartment was empty. My heart stopped. I dumped the entire box onto my bed, searching through tangled necklaces and mismatched earrings. Nothing. I tore through my dresser drawers, checked under the bed, inside every pocket of every coat. The ring was gone. Panic clawed at my throat. I called David, my voice breaking as I explained. He rushed over, helped me search again, methodically checking places I'd already torn apart twice. We found nothing. "Maybe you moved it somewhere safe and forgot," he suggested gently, but I knew better. The ring had never left that box. Someone had taken it. The only other person with a key to my apartment was my Aunt Patricia, my mother's younger sister. She'd been helping me plan the wedding, stopping by frequently to drop off flowers or pick up invitations. Patricia had always been the flashy one in the family, the one who married money and lived in a sprawling house in Westchester County, while looking down on the rest of us. I drove to her house that afternoon, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The mansion sat behind iron gates, all marble columns and manicured lawns. Patricia answered the door in a silk robe, her blonde hair perfectly styled even though it was barely noon. "Micah, darling," she purred, air-kissing my cheeks. "What brings you here?" "Grandma Rose's ring is missing," I said, watching her face. "From my jewelry box." She didn't even blink. "Oh, that old thing? I took it last week." The casual way she said it hit me like a physical blow. "You took it?" "For safekeeping," she waved her manicured hand dismissively. "You're so careless with valuables. And with the wedding coming up, I thought it best to have it properly appraised and cleaned. You know how Rose was about maintenance." I stared at her. "Where is it?" "At the jeweler's, of course. Henderson's on 5th Avenue. They're the best." She smiled like she'd done me a favor. "I'm having it reset in a more modern style. The original setting was so dated, so provincial. Rose had simple tastes, bless her heart." My vision blurred. "You had no right." "I had every right." Patricia's voice sharpened. "I'm the adult here, Micah. You're still a child playing dress-up. That ring is a family heirloom, not some costume jewelry for you to lose in that hovel you call an apartment. Grandma Rose gave it to me." Rose was dying and sentimental. She didn't understand the ring's true value. Patricia's smile turned cold. "Did you know it's worth over $30,000? The center stone is a rare pink diamond from the 1940s. Hardly something to leave with a girl who can barely pay her rent." The number hit me like a slap. $30,000. I had no idea. "I want it back," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Of course you do. And you'll have it, once it's properly restored. The wedding isn't for another month. Plenty of time." She started to close the door. "Trust me, darling. I know what's best for the family treasures." Quote, I drove home in a daze, Patricia's words echoing in my head. Family treasures. As if she had any claim to something Grandma Rose had specifically left to me. But what haunted me more was the casual cruelty in her voice, the way she'd dismissed Rose's final wishes, like they were the confused ramblings of a dying woman. That night I called Henderson's Jewelry. They had no record of any ring being brought in by Patricia Morrison. I called 3 other high-end jewelers in the city. Nothing. She was lying. I sat on my bed staring at the empty jewelry box, and for the first time since Grandma Rose died, I let myself cry. Not just for the ring, but for the betrayal. Patricia was family, the only connection I had left to my mother, and she'd stolen from me without a moment's hesitation. David found me there an hour later, curled up with one of Rose's old photo albums in my lap. He wrapped his arms around me as I told him about the jewelers, about Patricia's lies. We'll figure this out, he whispered into my hair. We'll get it back. But I wasn't sure we could. Patricia had money, connections, and lawyers. I had student debt and a part-time job at an art gallery. What chance did I have against someone who saw me as nothing more than a careless child? I flipped through the photo album, searching for pictures of the ring, anything that might help me prove it was mine. Most of the photos were old, black-and-white images of people I didn't recognize. But near the back, I found a section I'd never paid much attention to before. Wedding photos. Grandma Rose in a simple white dress, looking radiant despite the clearly modest ceremony. The groom stood beside her, tall and handsome in a military uniform. I'd always assumed it was my grandfather William, but I'd never seen pictures of their wedding before. I studied the man's face. He had kind eyes, a gentle smile, nothing like the grandfather I remembered, who'd been stern and distant before he died when I was 12. This man looked different. Younger, yes, but also softer somehow. My phone rang, startling me. Unknown number. Hello? Micah Rodriguez? The voice was elderly, male, unfamiliar. Yes? My name is Thomas Chen. I was a friend of your grandmother's. I heard about Rose's passing, and I've been meaning to reach out. There are some things she wanted you to know. I gripped the phone tighter. What kind of things? Not over the phone. Could we meet? Tomorrow, perhaps. There's a diner on Maple Street called Rosie's. Rose used to meet me there sometimes. Something in his voice made my skin prickle. How did you know my grandmother? A long pause. We worked together many years ago, before you were born, before everything changed. I don't understand. Rose made me promise that if anything ever happened to her, I'd make sure you learned the truth. About the ring, about her first marriage, about why she was so careful to keep certain secrets. My heart hammered against my ribs. First marriage? Tomorrow at noon, Micah, and bring the ring if you still have it. There's something engraved inside the band that Rose wanted you to see. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, Thomas Chen's words spinning through my mind. First marriage. But that was impossible. Grandma Rose had married my grandfather William when she was 19. She'd told me the story dozens of times. How they'd met at a church dance. How he'd courted her with handwritten letters and wildflowers. I looked back at the wedding photo, studying the groom's face again. The uniform looked military, but the style seemed older than what my grandfather would have worn. And now that I really looked, the man's features were different. Sharper cheekbones, darker hair, a different jawline entirely. My hands trembled as I turned the photo over. In faded pencil, someone had written, Rose and James, June 15th, 1943. James, not William. I spent the rest of the night going through every photo in the album, every scrap of paper tucked between the pages. I found more pictures of the mysterious James, always with Rose, always looking at her like she was the sun itself. They were clearly deeply in love, their joy radiating from every image. But I'd never heard his name before. In all my years with Grandma Rose, she'd never mentioned James. Her first husband, as far as I knew, had always been William. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. By morning, I was exhausted, but determined. I had to get the ring back from Patricia, not just because it was rightfully mine, but because Thomas Chen seemed to think it held answers to questions I was only beginning to understand. I called Patricia's house at 8 a.m., knowing she'd be up despite her late-night socializing habits. "I need the ring back today," I said without preamble. "Good morning to you too, darling," she said coldly. "And as I told you yesterday, the ring is being restored. These things take time." "Which jeweler?" "I'll pick it up myself." "Absolutely not. You'll only interfere with the process." Her voice took on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "Patience, Micah. Good things come to those who wait." "I know you're lying about the jeweler," I said. "I called them all." Silence stretched between us. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was ice. "You called around checking up on me? How dare you question my integrity?" "Where is my ring, Patricia?" "It's not your ring anymore," she snapped. "I've had it properly evaluated, and given your financial situation, I've decided to sell it. The money will go into a trust fund for your future, managed by someone responsible. Me." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "You can't do that." "I can, and I will. Rose left me as executor of her estate, which means I have final say over valuable family items. That ring is too precious to waste on a girl who lives paycheck to paycheck. She gave it to me directly, her final wish. The ramblings of a dying woman don't override legal documentation, sweetie." Patricia's voice dripped false sympathy. "When you're older, more established, perhaps we can discuss letting you wear it on special occasions." She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my kitchen, shaking with rage and helplessness. Patricia had the money to fight me in court if it came to that. She had lawyers, connections, the kind of social standing that made people believe her over someone like me. But more than that, she seemed to genuinely believe she was doing the right thing, that I was too irresponsible to own something valuable. The meeting with Thomas Chen couldn't come fast enough. Rosie's Diner was a small, time-worn place with red vinyl booths and the smell of coffee that had been brewing since the 1950s. I arrived 10 minutes early, my nerves jangling like live wires. A man in his 70s sat alone in a corner booth, wearing a neat cardigan and nursing a cup of coffee. When he saw me, he raised his hand in a small wave. "Micah?" His voice was gentle, tinged with an accent I couldn't place. "Thank you for coming." I slid into the booth across from him, studying his lined face. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the sort of man who looked like he'd spent his life reading books and feeding stray cats. "You said you knew my grandmother." "I did. We worked together during the war. She was the most remarkable woman I ever knew." His eyes grew distant. "I'm sorry for your loss. Rose spoke of you constantly. You were the light of her life." "How did you know her exactly?" Thomas Chen reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope yellowed with age. "Rose and I worked for the Office of Strategic Services during World War II, the precursor to the CIA. We were part of a team that helped smuggle people out of occupied territories." I stared at him. "My grandmother was a spy?" "She was a hero," he said simply. "She saved dozens of lives, maybe hundreds. And she fell in love with one of the men we were helping, a resistance fighter named James Morrison." The name from the photo. My heart pounded. She married him. In 1943, in a small ceremony in London. I was one of the witnesses. Thomas opened the envelope and pulled out a faded marriage certificate. Rose Morrison, née Hartwell, and James Morrison. I stared at the document, my grandmother's maiden name clearly printed in official type. But Morrison, that was Patricia's last name, my aunt's married name. "Patricia Morrison," I whispered. "My aunt." Thomas's expression darkened. "James's daughter, from his first marriage. She was just a child when Rose and James married, maybe 7 years old. Rose loved her like her own daughter, but Patricia never forgave Rose for taking her father's attention." The pieces were starting to fit together in a pattern that made my stomach turn. What happened to James? He was killed in 1944. During a mission in France. Rose was pregnant at the time. Thomas's voice grew soft. "She lost the baby 2 months later. The stress, the grief, it was too much. But she married my grandfather, William Rodriguez. After the war ended, she moved to America, changed her name back to Hartwell, tried to start over. William was a good man, a kind man. He knew about James, about the pain Rose carried, and he loved her anyway. They were happy together, as happy as Rose could be after losing her first love. Quote, I felt dizzy, overwhelmed by revelations that reframed everything I thought I knew about my grandmother's life. Why didn't she ever tell me any of this? Because she was protecting you, Thomas said, and because she made a promise to James before he died. He made her swear that if anything happened to him, she'd keep the ring safe until she could pass it on to someone who would understand its true value. Not monetary value, but emotional value. He reached across the table and took my hands. Rose told me about Patricia's behavior over the years, the way she'd always resented Rose, always felt entitled to James's memory. Rose was terrified that if Patricia learned about the ring's connection to her father, she'd try to take it. She already has taken it, I said, my voice breaking. Yesterday, she says she's going to sell it. Thomas's face went pale. We have to get it back. There's something inside that ring, something James hid there before his final mission. Rose spent 70 years protecting it, waiting for the right person to carry on that protection. What kind of something? The location of a safety deposit box in Switzerland. Inside that box are documents that could destroy some very powerful people who collaborated with the Nazis. People whose children and grandchildren now hold positions of influence. Thomas leaned forward, his voice urgent. James died protecting those secrets. Rose spent her life keeping them safe. And now that responsibility falls to you. I thought about Patricia's cold dismissal, her casual theft of something she had no right to take. But it wasn't just theft, I realized. It was erased. She was erasing my grandmother's true history, her first love, her greatest sacrifice. How do I get it back? I asked. Thomas smiled, and for a moment I could see the young spy he'd once been. Rose taught me that sometimes the best way to fight powerful people is to let them think they've already won. Patricia believes she holds all the cards, but she doesn't know what we know. He pulled out one more item from the envelope, a small brass key. Rose left this with me 20 years ago, along with instructions. If Patricia ever tried to claim the ring, I was to give you this key and tell you where to find what it opens. The key was warm in my palm, inscribed with numbers I didn't recognize. What does it open? A safety deposit box here in the city. Box 1247 at First National Bank. Inside, you'll find documents proving that Patricia has no legal claim to the ring, along with something else Rose wanted you to have. I stared at the key, feeling the weight of generations of secrets pressing down on me. My quiet, gentle grandmother had been a wartime spy, married to a resistance fighter, guardian of Nazi secrets. And now, somehow, I was part of that legacy. There's one more thing, Thomas said quietly. The ring isn't just valuable because of the diamond. The band itself is hollow. James had it specially made to hide microfilm. That microfilm contains the names and locations of Nazi gold that was never recovered, along with the identities of Americans who helped hide it after the war. My blood turned to ice water. Patricia wants to sell it. If she does, if she takes it to the wrong jeweler, if they discover what's hidden inside. Thomas shook his head. Those secrets have been protected for 80 years. Wars have been fought over less. I looked down at the key in my hand, then back at Thomas's worried face. Patricia thought she was stealing a valuable piece of jewelry from her irresponsible niece, but she'd actually stolen something that could rewrite history books and destroy some of the most powerful families in America. And she had no idea what she'd really taken. First National Bank sat like a fortress in downtown Manhattan, all granite columns and brass fixtures that spoke of old money and older secrets. I clutched the key Thomas had given me, its metal edges sharp against my palm as I approached the safety deposit box section. The security guard, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, barely glanced at my ID before leading me through a maze of corridors lined with numbered metal doors. Box 1247 was tucked in a corner, smaller than I'd expected, but somehow more ominous for its modest size. The key turned with a soft click that seemed to echo through the silent vault. Inside, wrapped in faded tissue paper, lay a collection of items that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The first thing I found was a letter addressed to me in Grandma Rose's careful handwriting. The paper was crisp, recently written, as if she'd known this day would come. "My dearest Maika," it began, "if you're reading this, then Patricia has shown her true colors at last. I've spent decades hoping she would change, that the little girl who once picked wildflowers for me would remember how to love instead of resent. But some wounds cut too deep, and some people choose bitterness over healing." My hands shook as I continued reading. Rose had known. Somehow she'd known exactly what Patricia would do. "The ring you're looking for contains more than just James's final gift to me. Hidden in the band is information that powerful people have killed to keep secret. James died protecting those secrets, and I've spent my life as their guardian. But I'm old now, and guardianship must pass to someone with the strength to bear it." The letter went on to explain that Patricia had been manipulating the family for years, using her position as executor of Rose's estate to slowly siphon money and valuables. The ring was just her latest theft, but it was also her most dangerous one. "Check the second envelope," Rose had written. "You'll find documentation of everything Patricia has stolen, along with proof that her claim to the ring is legally worthless. But be careful, my darling. Once you start pulling these threads, the whole tapestry may unravel." I set the letter aside and reached for a thick manila envelope marked "Evidence." Inside were bank statements, property deeds, insurance claims, and correspondence that painted a picture of systematic theft spanning nearly 2 decades. Patricia had been forging Rose's signature, redirecting funds, even selling family heirlooms and keeping the proceeds. But the most damning document was Patricia's marriage certificate to Jonathan Morrison, James's nephew. She hadn't just married into the Morrison name by coincidence. She'd actively sought out James's family, tracked down his surviving relatives, and positioned herself to claim any inheritance or family artifacts that might surface. The marriage had lasted only 3 years, ending in divorce when Jonathan discovered Patricia's true motives. But she'd kept his name, kept the connection to James's legacy, and apparently spent years researching her stepfather's wartime activities. A third envelope contained photocopies of newspaper clippings from the 1940s and 50s. Headlines about Nazi war criminals, stories about missing gold, articles about mysterious deaths of former OSS agents. Someone had been systematically eliminating people who knew about James's final mission. Rose had been smart to stay hidden, to reinvent herself as a simple factory worker in Queens. But Patricia's recent activities, her sudden interest in genealogy, her questions about Rose's past, her insistence on preserving family history, suggested she'd been digging, connecting dots that were never meant to be connected. I photographed every document with my phone, my heart racing, as the implications became clear. Patricia wasn't just a greedy relative stealing jewelry. She was part of something larger, something that had been decades in the making. The final item in the box was a small audio recorder, the kind that had been state-of-the-art in the 1980s. A note taped to it read, "Play this when you're alone and somewhere safe. Trust no one until you know who's really watching." I gathered everything, signed out of the bank, and drove home in a daze. The weight of the evidence felt heavier than the papers themselves, as if I'd inherited not just my grandmother's secrets but her fears as well. David was at work, giving me the privacy I needed to process what I'd learned. I locked my apartment door, checked the windows, and felt slightly ridiculous for the paranoia until I remembered the newspaper clippings about dead OSS agents. The audio recorder was old but functional. Rose's voice, younger and stronger than I remembered, filled my living room like a ghost speaking from the past. "This is Rose Morrison, recorded on March 15, 1987. If anyone is listening to this, it means the worst has happened and Patricia has finally made her move. I've been watching her for years, hoping she'd abandon her obsession with James's memory, but her behavior has become increasingly erratic." The recording paused, filled with the soft sound of Rose's breathing. 2 weeks ago, she visited me under the pretense of planning a family reunion, but she asked specific questions about James's war service, about what he might have hidden, about whether I'd kept any of his personal effects. She's been corresponding with someone. I found a letter in her purse when she went to the bathroom. It was signed HV and mentioned, quote, "recovering family assets," and, quote, "completing the circle." My blood chilled. HV. Those initials appeared on several of the bank documents I'd found, always as a secondary signatory or witness to Patricia's financial transactions. I've hidden the ring where she'll never think to look, Rose continued, but I fear I've waited too long to prepare you for what's coming. Micah, sweetheart, if you're hearing this, then you need to understand that the people hunting for James's information have been patient, but they're not gone. They've been waiting for me to die, waiting for the ring to surface, waiting for their chance to claim what they believe belongs to them. The recording crackled with static before Rose's voice returned, urgent now. Whatever you do, don't confront Patricia directly. She's not working alone, and she's more dangerous than she appears. The woman who raised you with such love has spent decades building a network of contacts, people who share her belief that James's secrets belong to his blood family. But James chose me to protect those secrets, and I'm choosing you. Static filled the air again, followed by a different voice, male, authoritative, speaking in the background. Rose's voice dropped to a whisper. Someone's at the door. If I don't make another recording, then you'll know they found me. Remember what I taught you about fighting smart, not hard. Use their expectations against them. Let them think they're winning until the moment you turn the tables. The recording ended with the sound of footsteps and a door closing. I stared at the silent device, chills running down my spine. The recording was dated just 2 months before Rose's sudden decline and death. She'd been healthy, sharp, fully capable of living independently. Then, seemingly overnight, she'd begun showing signs of confusion, memory loss, and physical weakness. At the time, we'd attributed it to age, to the normal decline of an elderly woman. But now, with Patricia's systematic theft and the mysterious HV's involvement, Rose's rapid deterioration looked far more sinister. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop looking into things that don't concern you. Some family secrets should stay buried. I screenshot the message, my hands trembling. Someone was watching me, tracking my movements, aware that I'd been to the bank. The paranoia Rose had embedded in her recordings suddenly seemed entirely rational. A second text arrived. The ring belongs to James's true family. Return it, and this ends peacefully. I stared at the words, parsing their implications. James's true family. Patricia had divorced his nephew decades ago, but apparently she still considered herself part of his bloodline. More importantly, she still believed she had a greater claim to his legacy than the woman he'd actually married. But there was something else, something that made my skin crawl. How did they know I'd found the safety deposit box? How did they know I was looking into anything at all? I walked through my apartment, checking for anything out of place. In my bedroom, I noticed my laptop had been moved slightly, its screen angled differently than I remembered leaving it. Someone had been here. My phone rang, making me jump. David's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, how did the bank thing go?" he asked, his voice warm and normal and wonderfully familiar. "It was educational," I said, glancing around my apartment again. "David, can you come home early today? I think we need to talk." "Of course. Is everything okay? You sound shaken." "I'm fine, just there's a lot more to this story than I realized." After we hung up, I grabbed the recorder and documents, stuffing them into a bag along with some clothes and toiletries. If someone had been in my apartment once, they'd come back, and next time, they might not be content with just searching. I was halfway to the door when my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Patricia's name. "Micah, darling," her voice was honey-sweet, but with an edge I'd never heard before. "I understand you've been making some inquiries about family history." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play games with me. I know you went to the bank today. I know you found Rose's little collection of paranoid fantasies." Patricia's mask was slipping, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "That woman filled your head with nonsense about some grand conspiracy, but the truth is much simpler." "What truth?" "The truth is that your grandmother was a thief who stole from James's family after he died. She took artifacts that belonged to his bloodline, precious items that should have been passed down to his rightful heirs. All I'm doing is correcting a decades-old injustice." I thought about the marriage certificate, the photos, the evidence of Rose and James's genuine love. She was his wife. "She was his wartime mistake," Patricia snapped. "A brief infatuation that ended when reality set in. James would have left her eventually, would have come home to America, and married someone appropriate. Instead, he died playing hero, and she exploited his death to claim inheritance that was never hers. The venom in her voice was startling. This wasn't grief, or even simple greed. This was decades of festering resentment, a wound that had poisoned everything it touched. The ring was left to me, I said firmly, by a confused old woman who was manipulated into believing fairy tales about wartime romance. I have documentation proving James intended his personal effects to return to his American family. The ring has always belonged to the Morrison bloodline. What documentation? Letters, contracts, sworn statements from people who knew James before he met Rose. Evidence that your precious grandmother spent 70 years ignoring his true wishes. Patricia's voice grew harder. Return the ring voluntarily, and I'll make sure you receive fair compensation. Continue this ridiculous investigation, and you'll find out exactly how far James's family is willing to go to reclaim what's ours. The threat was unmistakable. I thought about the mysterious HV, about the OSS agents who'd died under suspicious circumstances, about Rose's sudden decline in death. I need time to think, I said. You have 24 hours. After that, the offer expires and other measures become necessary. Patricia hung up without saying goodbye. I stood in my hallway, clutching my phone and the bag of evidence, feeling like a small animal caught in a trap that was only now beginning to close. Patricia had resources, connections, people willing to break into apartments and make threats. What did I have except a handful of old documents and a dead grandmother's warnings? But as I thought about Rose's letter, about her careful preparations and her faith in my ability to handle whatever came next, I felt something shift inside me. She hadn't left me defenseless. She'd left me armed with the truth, with documentation, with proof of Patricia's lies and theft. More importantly, she'd taught me that sometimes the best way to win against powerful people was to let them think they'd already won. Patricia believed she held all the advantages: money, connections, legal resources. But she didn't know what I knew. She didn't understand that her threats had just confirmed everything Rose had suspected. I grabbed my car keys and headed for the door. 24 hours felt like a lifetime when you were planning to turn someone's entire world upside down. But first, I needed to find out who HV was and how deep this conspiracy really went. The answer, I suspected, was waiting in the microfilm hidden inside my grandmother's wedding ring, the ring that Patricia had stolen without realizing she'd just handed me the key to destroying her entire operation. Outside my apartment building, a black sedan with tinted windows sat idling across the street. The driver was a silhouette behind dark glass, but I could feel eyes watching as I walked to my car. Let them watch, I thought. Let them think they were controlling the situation. Because in 24 hours, when Patricia expected me to surrender, I was going to give her something she wasn't expecting at all. The truth. And everything that came with it. The Columbia University Library's Special Collections Archive smelled like old paper and forgotten secrets. I'd driven there straight from my apartment, the black sedan following me for 6 blocks before mysteriously disappearing into traffic. Either they'd given up surveillance, or they'd gotten clever about it. Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, the head archivist, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who specialized in World War II documentation. Thomas Chen had called ahead, using credentials I didn't know he possessed, and somehow secured me access to restricted military records. Your grandmother's service record makes for fascinating reading, Dr. Vasquez said, spreading manila folders across a secured table. Rose Hartwell was involved in some of the most dangerous operations of the war. Operation Jedburgh, Operation Carpetbagger, missions that are still partially classified even today. I photographed each page carefully, my phone's camera capturing details I'd never heard Rose mention. Commendations for bravery, mission reports describing harrowing escapes, and personnel files that painted a picture of a woman far more complex than the gentle grandmother who'd braided my hair. This James Morrison she worked with, Dr. Vasquez continued. He was something special. British Special Operations Executive, cross-trained with American OSS. The man spoke 6 languages fluently and had a particular talent for extracting valuable intelligence from occupied territories. She pulled out a photograph I'd never seen before. James in full military gear, standing beside a group of resistance fighters in what looked like the French countryside. His face was harder here, weathered by war, but his eyes held the same kindness I'd seen in Rose's wedding photos. According to these records, Morrison was working on something called Operation Bernhard when he was killed. Nazi counterfeiting operation. Massive in scope. The Germans were printing millions in fake British pounds, planning to destabilize the Allied economy. Dr. Vasquez lowered her voice. Morrison discovered the location of the printing plates and the master currency died. That information was never recovered. My pulse quickened. What happened to it? Officially, lost when Morrison died. But there are notes in the margins here suggesting he managed to hide the intelligence before his final mission. Some of these documents have addendums from the 1950s, references to ongoing searches for Morrison's cache. She showed me a file marked with red stamps, classified, eyes only, compartmented. Even decades later, someone was still looking for whatever James had hidden. Dr. Vasquez, have you ever heard the initials HV in connection with any of this? Her expression shifted, became guarded. Where did you hear that name? In some family documents. Someone who's been interfering with my grandmother's estate. She was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out a different folder, this one more recent. Heinrich Volker, former Nazi economics minister who disappeared at the end of the war. Intelligence reports suggested he made it to America with significant stolen assets, changed his name, started a new life, but never stopped looking for the Bernhard materials. The room seemed to grow colder. He's still alive? His son is. Harold Volker goes by H.V. Morrison in business circles. Real estate empire, political connections, the kind of legitimate wealth that makes people forget where the original money came from. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. If someone using those initials is involved in your family situation, you need to be very, very careful. I thought about Patricia's threats, about the surveillance, about Rose's rapid decline before her death. How careful. The Volker family has been linked to several suspicious deaths over the decades. People who got too close to uncovering their wartime activities. Officially, these were accidents, suicides, natural causes. But the pattern is troubling. She pulled out newspaper clippings, obituaries spanning 40 years. Former OSS agents who died in car crashes. Historians who'd suffered sudden heart attacks while researching Nazi gold. Journalists who'd committed suicide just before publishing exposés on war criminal networks. Your grandmother was smart to stay hidden, Dr. Vasquez said. But if the Volkers have found her now... I left the library with a memory card full of classified documents, and a growing understanding of just how dangerous my situation had become. Patricia wasn't just a greedy relative. She was connected to people who'd been hunting for James's secrets for 80 years. My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A text from David. Working late tonight. Chinese takeout when I get home? I started to reply, then stopped. Something felt wrong. David never used punctuation in texts. Never wrote complete sentences. He communicated in abbreviated bursts, emoji-heavy messages that barely qualified as English. I called him instead. The phone went straight to voicemail. Fear crawled up my spine. I drove to his accounting firm, parked across the street, and watched the building. David's car wasn't in the lot. The security guard told me David had left at noon and said he had a family emergency. I hadn't heard from him since our morning conversation. My hands shook as I called his mother in Albany. No, she hadn't heard from David. No family emergency she knew about. She sounded confused, concerned, and asked if everything was all right. I hung up and stared at my phone, trying to make sense of what was happening. Either David was in danger, or, and this thought made my stomach turn, he wasn't who I thought he was. The engagement ring on my finger suddenly felt heavy, foreign. How long had David and I been dating? 2 years. How had we met? Through mutual friends at a coffee shop. How convenient. How perfectly orchestrated for someone who needed to get close to Rose's granddaughter. I drove to our shared apartment, my mind racing through every conversation, every interaction, looking for signs I'd missed. David had always been supportive of my relationship with Rose, always encouraged me to spend time with her, to learn about family history. At the time, it seemed sweet. Now it felt calculated. The apartment was empty, but not in the way of someone who'd left for work and planned to return. David's clothes were gone from the closet. His toiletries had been cleared from the bathroom. The dresser drawers that had held his belongings were completely empty. In the kitchen, I found a note in his handwriting, but not the casual scrawl I was used to. This was careful, precise penmanship that looked almost formal. Micah, I'm sorry it had to end this way. The engagement was a mistake. I've taken a job in Seattle and won't be coming back. Please don't try to contact me. What we had was real, but some things are more important than love. You'll understand someday. David. I read it 3 times, each word feeling like a physical blow. 2 years of my life, a man I'd been planning to marry, and he'd vanished like smoke. But it was the phrasing that chilled me most. Some things are more important than love. It sounded like something someone had told him to write. I searched the apartment methodically, looking for anything David might have left behind. In the very back of his sock drawer, I found something that stopped my heart. A small listening device, professionally installed, still blinking with a tiny red light. Our entire relationship had been under surveillance. I grabbed the bug and my overnight bag, left the apartment, and drove aimlessly through the city while trying to process the implications. David had been watching me, reporting on me, probably for months or even years. Everything I told him about Rose, about family history, about the ring, it had all been fed back to whoever was pulling his strings. Patricia had known exactly when to make her move because David had been providing intelligence. My phone rang. Thomas Chen. Micah, we need to meet immediately. Something's happened. Where? The parking garage under St. Mary's Hospital, level 3. Come alone and watch for surveillance. 20 minutes later, I found Thomas pacing beside a concrete pillar, his usual calm demeanor replaced by obvious agitation. They took the ring, he said without preamble. What do you mean? Patricia went to a federal judge this morning with documentation claiming the ring was stolen Nazi property that needed to be held in federal custody pending an investigation. She had letters, supposedly from James Morrison, stating that any jewelry or valuables he possessed during the war should be returned to American authorities if he died. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. Those documents would have to be forged, yes, but very sophisticated forgeries, the kind that require resources and expertise. Thomas pulled out his phone, showed me a news article from that morning. Federal agents raided Henderson's jewelry an hour ago and seized the ring. It's now in federal evidence lockup. Quote, I stared at the headline, World War II artifacts recovered in multi-agency investigation. The article mentioned Patricia by name as a, quote, family member who'd brought potential war crimes evidence to authorities. She's not just stealing from me, I realized. She's using the federal government to do it. It gets worse. The same judge issued a warrant for any additional materials related to James Morrison's wartime activities. They're calling it a national security investigation. Thomas handed me a manila envelope. These are copies of everything from your grandmother's safety deposit box. I retrieved them this morning before the warrant was served. The originals are now in federal custody. How is Patricia doing this? How does she have this kind of influence? Harold Volker HV has connections everywhere. Defense contractors, intelligence agencies, federal judges. When you've been laundering Nazi gold for 80 years, you accumulate significant political capital. Thomas's expression was grim. They're not just after the ring anymore, Micah. They're after you. As if to emphasize his point, my phone buzzed with a new message. Federal investigation ongoing. Report to the FBI field office tomorrow at 9 a.m. for questioning. Failure to comply will result in an arrest warrant. They can't do this, I said, but even as I spoke the words, I knew they were wrong. They could do whatever they wanted, because they had the power and I had nothing but copies of documents and the word of a elderly man. There's one advantage we still have, Thomas said quietly. They think they have the ring, but they don't know what's really hidden inside it. The microfilm is protected by a mechanism James designed. If they try to access it incorrectly, it destroys itself. What kind of mechanism? The ring has to be opened in a specific sequence, using a code that only Rose knew. She was supposed to teach it to you before she died, but Patricia moved too quickly. Thomas pulled out a small piece of paper. Fortunately, Rose left the code with me, along with instructions for building a device that can extract the microfilm safely. I looked at the paper, a series of numbers and symbols that meant nothing to me. Even if we had the code, we don't have the ring. Not yet, but federal evidence lockup isn't impenetrable. Rose spent years planning for this possibility. She had contacts, people who owed her favors from the old days. Thomas smiled grimly. Your grandmother was very thorough when it came to contingency planning. You're talking about breaking into a federal facility. I'm talking about recovering stolen property using resources your grandmother put in place decades ago. She knew this day would come, knew that eventually the Volkers would make their move. Everything we need to get that ring back is already in motion. My phone rang. Patricia's name on the screen. Don't answer, Thomas warned. But I was tired of running, tired of being reactive while other people controlled my life. I picked it up. You have excellent timing, Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I assume you've heard about the federal investigation. I heard you lied to a federal judge. I provided accurate historical documentation about stolen Nazi property. The fact that Rose spent 70 years hiding evidence of war crimes doesn't make her a victim, sweetheart. It makes her an accessory. The casual way she slandered Rose's memory made my vision blur with rage. You know that's not true. What I know is that James Morrison died protecting American interests, and your grandmother stole artifacts that belonged to the United States government. The ring is exactly where it should be, in federal custody, being properly investigated by people qualified to handle sensitive historical materials. And you just happen to have documentation proving all this? Patricia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Darling, my family has been researching James Morrison's activities for decades. We have letters, photographs, sworn statements from people who served with him. Everything your precious Rose never bothered to tell you. Everything Harold Volker helped you forge, you mean? Silence on the other end of the line. When Patricia spoke again, her voice was different, colder, more calculating. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but you're out of your depth. This is a federal investigation now. If you interfere, if you make any attempt to contact certain people or access certain materials, you'll find yourself facing charges that could put you in prison for the rest of your life. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You're a part-time art gallery employee with student loans and no political connections. I'm a respected member of the community with resources you can't imagine. This was never a fair fight. And now it's not a fight at all. It's over. She hung up before I could respond. Thomas was watching me with concern. What did she say? That we're outgunned and I should give up. I looked at the paper with Rose's code, at the FBI summons, at the evidence that my entire life had been a carefully orchestrated manipulation. But Rose didn't raise me to give up. She raised me to fight smart. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Patricia made one crucial mistake. She assumes she knows everything Rose taught me, everything Rose prepared me for. But she's forgotten that Rose was a spy first and a grandmother second. I folded the code carefully and put it in my pocket. She trained me for this moment my entire life. I just never realized that's what she was doing. Thomas smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. What do you need? I need to know exactly how we're going to get that ring back. And then I need to know how we're going to destroy everyone who thinks they can steal from my family and get away with it. As we walked back to our cars, I noticed the black sedan again, parked 3 levels down but visible through the concrete barriers. They were still watching, still following, still assuming I was just a frightened young woman in over her head. They had no idea what Rose had really taught me during all those quiet afternoons in her kitchen, all those stories she'd told about problem solving and strategic thinking. They thought they were hunting a victim. They were about to discover they'd been hunting a predator. The abandoned subway tunnel beneath Brooklyn felt like descending into the underworld. Thomas led me through a maze of rusted turnstiles and forgotten platforms, our flashlights cutting through darkness that had swallowed this place decades ago. According to him, Rose had used these tunnels during the Cold War for meetings too sensitive for normal locations. She maintained safe houses throughout the city, Thomas explained as we walked deeper into the tunnel system. Your grandmother never really retired from intelligence work. She just became unofficial. We stopped at what looked like a maintenance store, its surface covered in rust and graffiti. Thomas produced an antique key that opened the lock with surprising ease. Inside was a room that shouldn't have existed. Clean, organized, equipped with communication devices that looked decades more advanced than anything I'd seen. "Welcome to Rose's real workshop," Thomas said, flipping switches that brought the space to life. "She's been running operations out of here since 1962. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, maps connected by red string, like something from a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. But this wasn't paranoia. This was methodical intelligence gathering spanning 60 years. Photos of Harold Volcker at social events, business dealings, political fundraisers, charts tracking money movements between shell companies, lists of names, dates, suspicious deaths. "She knew they were coming," I whispered, studying a timeline that ended with my name written in red ink. "She knew they'd eventually find her, yes, but she also knew they'd underestimate you." Thomas pulled out a thick folder marked with my name. "These are your real lessons, Micah. Everything Rose taught you, recontextualized for what it actually was." I opened the folder to find detailed analyses of every story Rose had ever told me. The fairy tale about the princess who defeated the dragon? Actually a lesson in misdirection and using enemy weaknesses against them. The bedtime story about the girl who found treasure in her grandmother's attic? A tutorial in following clues and recognizing hidden compartments. She was training me, I realized. From the moment you came to live with her, Rose knew this day would arrive, knew you'd need specific skills to survive it. Thomas pulled out a different file. But she also knew you'd need allies, people who owed her favors, who understood the stakes. The file contained contact information for a network of individuals scattered across government agencies, private security firms, even organized crime families. Each entry included detailed notes about services rendered and debts owed. "Some of these people are in their 80s, I said, scanning the list. "Others are their children and grandchildren. Rose saved a lot of lives during the war and after. Those kinds of debts get passed down through generations." Thomas pulled out his phone. "I've already activated 3 teams. Federal evidence lockup is being surveilled as we speak." A communication device in the corner crackled to life. A woman's voice, professional and clipped. "Nightingale Base, this is Sparrow 1. The target facility has standard security rotation, 2 guards, electronic locks, motion sensors inactive on sublevel 3. Thomas moved to the device. "Sparrow 1, this is Nightingale Base. Confirm package location. Package secured in evidence, Vault 7, 3rd sublevel. Access requires biometric scan plus numerical code. No additional security measures detected." I stared at Thomas. "You have people inside the federal building?" "Rose has people everywhere. Did you think she spent 70 years hiding without building insurance policies?" He turned back to the radio. "Sparrow 1, initiate Phase 2. Package retrieval in 6 hours." "Copy that, Nightingale Base. Phase 2 initiated." The implications were staggering. My gentle grandmother, who'd worked in a textile factory and made me grilled cheese sandwiches, had been running an intelligence operation that could break into federal facilities. "There's something else you need to see," Thomas said, leading me to a computer terminal I hadn't noticed. The screen was displaying real-time surveillance footage from multiple locations. Patricia's house, Harold Volcker's Manhattan office, even the FBI field office where I was supposed to report tomorrow. How is this possible? Rose spent decades placing assets, building networks, creating redundancies. She knew that when the Volckers finally made their move, she'd need eyes everywhere. Thomas pointed to one of the screens. "Look at this." The feed showed Patricia in what appeared to be Volcker's private office, but she wasn't behaving like a grieving family member seeking justice. She was pacing, agitated, arguing with someone off camera. The audio was clear enough to understand every word. "The granddaughter knows more than we anticipated," Patricia was saying. "She went to Columbia, accessed classified records. Someone is helping her." A man's voice responded, elderly, accented, unmistakably German. Then we accelerate the timeline. How long until the ring can be opened? Our expert says 48 hours. The mechanism is more sophisticated than expected. James Morrison was cleverer than we gave him credit for. And if the granddaughter becomes a problem? Patricia's pause was chilling. She won't be a problem much longer. David confirms she trusts no one except that old Chinese man. Once we eliminate him, she'll be completely isolated. My blood froze. They were planning to kill Thomas. The girl herself is expendable, the German voice continued. Once we have the Bernhard materials, there's no reason to leave loose ends. I understand, Patricia said. It's unfortunate, but necessary. Rose should have taught her granddaughter to mind her own business. The feed cut to black. Thomas was watching my face. Now you understand the stakes. This isn't about theft or even family disputes. They're willing to commit murder to protect secrets that are 80 years old. Why? What could be worth that much? The Bernhard operation wasn't just about counterfeiting British currency. It was about economic warfare on a scale that would make today's financial crises look like minor fluctuations. Thomas pulled up files on another computer. The Nazis printed over 130 million pounds sterling, perfect replicas that were undetectable. But that was just phase 1. The screen filled with documents I couldn't read, German text mixed with financial charts and geographical maps. Phase 2 was Operation Andreas, named after Heinrich Volker's codename. They planned to flood the American economy with counterfeit dollars, crash the currency, and destabilize the entire Allied war effort. James discovered the location of the printing plates, the paper supplies, even the distribution networks. And he hid that information in the ring. Not just the information. The access codes to Swiss bank accounts where the Nazi gold was hidden, the real names of American collaborators who helped launder the money, evidence of post-war networks that continued the operation. Thomas's expression was grim. Harold Volker has spent his entire life building legitimate wealth on top of stolen Nazi gold. If that information becomes public, it doesn't just destroy him, it brings down banks, corporations, political figures across 3 continents. I understood now why they were willing to kill for the ring. It wasn't just evidence of historical crimes. It was a nuclear weapon aimed at the entire global financial system. The surveillance footage you just saw was recorded 2 hours ago, Thomas continued. Which means they're planning to move against us tonight. We need that ring back now, not in 6 hours. The radio crackled again. Different voice this time, male, urgent. Nightingale Base, this is Eagle Eye. Multiple vehicles approaching Sparrow 1's position. Federal agents, but not standard issue. Private security, military-grade equipment. Thomas grabbed the microphone. Eagle Eye, confirm Sparrow 1's status. Sparrow 1 is mobile, but they've been made. Looks like someone leaked the operation. My stomach dropped. How is that possible? The same way they knew you went to Colombia. The same way they had David watching you for 2 years. They have people everywhere, too. Thomas was already moving, gathering equipment, destroying sensitive documents. We need to leave, now. What about the ring? The ring is secondary to keeping you alive. Without you, even if we recover it, we can't decode the information inside. As if summoned by his words, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red light that made the room look like a crime scene. Too late, Thomas whispered. Through the walls, I could hear footsteps in the tunnels, multiple sets moving with military precision. They'd found us. Thomas pressed something into my hand. A small device that looked like a garage door opener. If anything happens to me, press this. It will activate a dead man's switch that releases everything Rose collected about the Volker network to journalists worldwide. Thomas, promise me. I promise. The footsteps were getting closer. Thomas moved to a wall panel I hadn't noticed, revealing a hidden passage barely wide enough for one person. This leads to the old pneumatic postal system. Follow it north for half a mile, you'll come out in the basement of St. Patrick's Cathedral. There's a priest there, Father Miguel Santos, who owes Rose a considerable debt. Tell him who you are, he'll know what to do. What about you? I'm going to buy you time and hopefully take some of them with me. Thomas smiled, and for a moment I could see the young spy he'd once been. Your grandmother would be proud of you, Maka. You're everything she hoped you'd become. The first explosion rocked the tunnel outside. They weren't just here to arrest us. They were here to eliminate witnesses. I squeezed through the hidden passage as gunfire erupted behind me. The tunnel was cramped, dark, filled with the sound of my own breathing and the distant echo of violence. But I kept moving, crawling through a space designed for message tubes, not people. The dead man's switch felt heavy in my pocket, its significance growing with every yard I traveled. Thomas might be dying or dead. Rose was gone. I was alone with evidence that could reshape history, hunted by people who'd killed to protect their secrets for 8 decades. But as I crawled through the darkness, I realized something that made me smile despite everything. They'd made the same mistake Patricia always made. They underestimated me because they couldn't see past their own arrogance. They thought I was just a scared girl running for her life. They had no idea I was carrying a weapon that could destroy them all, and they'd just given me every reason to use it. The tunnel began to slope upward. Somewhere ahead was St. Patrick's Cathedral, Father Santos, and whatever resources Rose had positioned there. Behind me was the sound of sirens, explosions, and the systematic destruction of everything Thomas had built. But none of that mattered now, because I finally understood what Rose had been preparing me for my entire life. Not just to survive this moment, but to win it completely. The Volkers had spent 80 years building their empire on stolen gold and buried secrets. They'd murdered witnesses, corrupted officials, and manipulated governments. But they'd never faced a granddaughter raised by Rose Morrison, trained in lessons they didn't even recognize as training, equipped with weapons they didn't know existed. I emerged from the tunnel into a basement that smelled of incense and old stone. A Hispanic priest was waiting for me, as if he'd been expecting this moment for years. Micah Rodriguez? He asked. Yes. Your grandmother saved my father's life in El Salvador in 1982. I've been waiting 30 years to repay that debt. Father Santos handed me a phone. There's someone who wants to speak with you. I took the phone with trembling hands. The voice on the other end was familiar but impossible. Hello, sweetheart, Rose said. I suppose it's time I told you the rest of the story. The voice on the phone was definitely Rose's, but wrong somehow. Stronger, clearer, lacking the frail quality I remembered from her final months. Grandma Rose? My voice cracked around the words. But you died. I was at your funeral. I died on paper, sweetheart. Sometimes that's the only way to stay alive long enough to finish the job. There was background noise on her end. Typing, multiple voices, the hum of electronic equipment. I'm sorry for the deception, but it was necessary. The Volkers had to believe I was gone before they'd make their real move. Father Santos was watching me with knowing eyes, as if he'd been part of this elaborate theater from the beginning. The basement around us wasn't just a church storage area. I could see communication equipment hidden behind religious artifacts, maps tucked inside hymnal covers. Where are you? I asked. Close enough to help, far enough to stay safe. For now. Rose's voice carried an edge I'd never heard before, the sound of someone used to giving orders in life or death situations. Thomas is alive, by the way. Wounded, but alive. He's en route to a safe house with the materials we managed to salvage. Relief flooded through me. How do you know that? Because I've been watching everything, sweetheart. Every move you've made, every decision you've faced. I had to know you were ready before I revealed myself. There was pride in her voice. You've exceeded every expectation. James would have been so proud. Father Santos handed me a tablet displaying multiple surveillance feeds. I could see Patricia's house, Volker's office, the federal building where my ring was being held. On one screen, Thomas was indeed alive, being helped into a van by people I didn't recognize. The explosion in the tunnels was controlled, Rose continued. We needed them to think they'd eliminated our base of operations while actually just destroying decoy equipment. The real command center has been mobile for years. This is insane. You faked your own death? I've been faking deaths for 70 years, dear. Mine was just the most personal. Rose's tone became businesslike. But we don't have time for explanations now. Patricia and Volker are moving faster than anticipated. They've brought in a specialist to crack the ring's mechanism, someone with experience in wartime encryption devices. On the tablet, I watched grainy footage of the Federal Evidence Facility. A woman in a lab coat was examining something at a workstation, something small and circular that caught the light like captured starfire. "That's Dr. Sarah Kellerman," Rose said. "Former East German intelligence, expertise in mechanical cryptography. If anyone can open James's mechanism without destroying the contents, it's her." "How long do we have?" 6 hours, maybe less. Once they access the microfilm, they'll have everything they need to eliminate the remaining witnesses and disappear with evidence that could blackmail half the world's financial institutions. Father Santos was preparing equipment I didn't recognize, devices that looked like a cross between computer hardware and Cold War spy gadgets. He worked with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "What's the plan?" I asked. "We're going to give them exactly what they want," Rose said, "and exactly what they deserve. But first, you need to understand the complete truth about your inheritance. It's not just about the ring, Micah, it's about what you represent." The tablet switched to a new screen: genealogical charts, DNA analyses, documents that traced bloodlines across continents and centuries. My family tree, but expanded far beyond anything I'd ever seen. "Your great-great-grandmother on your father's side was Maria Santos Kellerman, a German Jewish banker who helped finance resistance operations during World War I. The Kellermans were one of the families the Nazis systematically destroyed, their assets seized, their records erased." My head spun. "Dr. Kellerman, is she?" "Sarah Kellerman is your cousin, technically. Third cousin, once removed. Her grandmother and your great-great-grandmother were sisters." Rose's voice carried grim satisfaction. "She doesn't know this, of course. The Volkers have spent decades recruiting people with genetic connections to their victims, turning them into unwitting tools of revenge. The psychological cruelty was breathtaking. They'd found a descendant of a family they'd helped destroy and turned her into an instrument of their continued cover-up. There's more," Rose continued. "Patricia isn't just connected to the Volkers through Harold's network. Her first husband, before she married James's nephew, was Klaus Volker, Harold's brother. The marriage was annulled after 6 months, but not before she gained access to family records, including James's wartime activities." Father Santos pulled up another screen showing marriage certificates, divorce papers, financial transactions. Patricia's involvement with the Volker family went back decades, predating her interest in James Morrison by years. "She's been planning this since she was 25 years old," I realized. "Longer than that. The Volkers identified her as a potential asset when she was still in college. They've been grooming her, positioning her, waiting for the right moment to use her connection to James's legacy." Everything clicked into place. Patricia's sudden appearance in my life after my parents died, her insistence on being named executor of Rose's estate, her questions about family history that had seemed innocent at the time. She wasn't just my aunt, she was my handler. Until you started asking inconvenient questions, and we realized you'd inherited more than just James's courage. Rose's voice warmed. "You got his gift for seeing patterns, for thinking 3 steps ahead. That's when I knew we could turn this entire operation against them." Father Santos finished his preparations and nodded to me. The basement had been transformed into something resembling a war room, with communication links to locations I couldn't identify and enough firepower to outfit a small army. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "I need you to walk into the FBI field office tomorrow morning exactly as planned. Tell them you want to cooperate, that you're prepared to provide information about Rose's wartime activities in exchange for immunity." "You want me to surrender?" "I want you to let them think you're surrendering while actually delivering the most devastating intelligence operation in modern history." Rose's voice carried the sharp edge of a predator moving in for the kill. "Patricia believes she's won. Volker thinks he's finally going to claim his father's legacy. They have no idea they're about to lose everything they've spent 80 years building." Father Santos handed me a small device that looked like a hearing aid. "Encrypted communication. Your grandmother will be able to guide you through everything." "Guide me through what exactly?" through convincing them you're broken, defeated, ready to trade family secrets for personal safety, while actually recording every word they say, documenting every crime they confess to, and positioning them for the kind of exposure that will destroy them across multiple continents. The tablet showed new footage. Patricia entering the FBI building, accompanied by a man I didn't recognize, but who moved with the casual authority of someone accustomed to having buildings cleared for his convenience. Harold Volker himself, Rose said. He flew in from Switzerland this morning. The fact that he's here personally means they consider this the end game. What if something goes wrong? What if they realize I'm recording them? Then you press the dead man switch Thomas gave you, and we release everything simultaneously across 50 news outlets worldwide. Either way, their secrets become public. The only question is whether we can gather enough additional evidence to completely destroy their network or just severely damage it. Father Santos was watching the surveillance feeds with professional intensity. They're moving additional security into the federal building. This isn't standard FBI protocol. They're running a private operation inside a government facility, quote, which gives us legal justification for what comes next, Rose said. Micah, you need to understand that tomorrow isn't just about recovering the ring. It's about ending a conspiracy that has influenced global politics for 80 years. The evidence James died protecting, the secrets the Volkers have killed to preserve, all of it comes to light tomorrow. I thought about Thomas bleeding in that tunnel, about David's 2-year deception, about Patricia's casual dismissal of Rose's memory. The fear was still there, but it was being overtaken by something else. A cold, calculating anger that felt inherited rather than learned. Tell me exactly what you want me to do. Rose's plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its scope. I would walk into the FBI building as a frightened young woman seeking protection from family members who'd threatened her. I'd offer to trade information about Rose's wartime activities for immunity and witness protection. But the device Father Santos had given me would record everything, not just my conversations, but ambient audio from anywhere in the building. Rose's network had spent years placing assets inside federal agencies, people who could ensure the device wasn't detected and that its transmissions reached the right recipients. Patricia will want to be present when you're questioned, Rose explained. Her ego demands that she witness your complete defeat. Volker will want to hear firsthand what you know about the ring's contents before deciding whether to let you live. And if they decide I know too much, then we spring the trap early. But I suspect their arrogance will work in our favor. They'll want to gloat to explain exactly how cleverly they've manipulated you. Villains always do. Father Santos was preparing additional equipment, cameras disguised as religious medals, transmitters hidden in apparently innocent jewelry. Your grandmother has been planning this confrontation for decades. Every contingency has been considered. What about Dr. Kellerman? Do we tell her who she really is? Not yet. She's a victim, too, in her own way. Once the truth comes out, once the Volker network is exposed, she'll have to face what she's been used for. Rose's voice carried genuine sadness. But that revelation needs to happen at the right time, in the right way. Some truths are too devastating to rush. I spent the rest of the night in the church basement, memorizing contingency plans and backup protocols. Rose talked me through everything: how to behave, what to say, how to appear vulnerable, while actually maintaining control of the situation. Remember, she said as dawn approached, they think they're the predators, and you're the prey. Let them keep thinking that until the moment you reveal the truth. James used to say that the best intelligence operations are the ones where the targets destroy themselves. At 7 a.m., Father Santos drove me to the federal building in an unmarked van that looked ordinary but contained enough surveillance equipment to monitor half of Manhattan. I was wearing clothes that appeared normal but carried recording devices in the fabric itself. Your grandmother loves you very much, he said as we approached the building. She's proud of the woman you've become, proud of the courage you're showing. Whatever happens today, remember that you're not alone. I could see Patricia waiting in the lobby, dressed in expensive black as if attending a funeral. Beside her stood a man in his 70s, tall, distinguished, with cold blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. Harold Volker in person was exactly what I'd expected. The kind of man who'd built an empire on stolen gold and convinced himself he deserved every penny. They were both smiling as I approached, confident in their victory. They had no idea they were about to hand me everything I needed to destroy them. "Micah, darling," Patricia called out, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm so glad you've come to your senses. This will all be over soon." As I walked toward them, Rose's voice whispered in my ear through the hidden device. "Showtime, sweetheart. Let's finish what James started." I arranged my features into an expression of defeat and walked through the doors of the federal building, carrying 80 years of secrets and the means to finally expose them all. The FBI interrogation room was smaller than I'd expected, all beige walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sick. Patricia sat across from me with Harold Volker, both of them radiating the confidence of people who believed they'd already won. Special Agent Martinez, the federal investigator, seemed uncomfortable with their presence but clearly outranked by forces beyond his control. "Miss Rodriguez," Agent Martinez began, "we understand you have information about wartime artifacts that may have been illegally retained by your grandmother." Quote. I let my voice shake slightly, playing the part Rose had taught me. "I just want this to end. Patricia says if I cooperate, I won't face charges." "That's correct," Patricia said smoothly. "We're all on the same side here, Micah. We just want to ensure historical artifacts are properly preserved and studied." Volker hadn't spoken yet, but his pale eyes never left my face. He was studying me like a specimen, looking for weaknesses, calculating threats. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the faint accent of someone who'd spent decades perfecting his American pronunciation. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he said. "She protected secrets that could have been very valuable to historical researchers. We simply want to continue her work in more official capacity." Through the hidden earpiece, Rose's voice whispered, "He's fishing. Let him think you know less than you do." "I don't understand most of what Rose told me," I said, allowing confusion to color my words. "She talked about the war sometimes, but it seemed like stories. I never thought any of it was real." "What about the ring?" Patricia leaned forward. "Did she ever explain why it was so important to her?" "She said it was from her first husband, but I thought she meant Grandpa William. I didn't know about James until—" I let my voice trail off as if I'd said too much. Volker's expression sharpened. "What did you discover about James Morrison?" "Just that they were married during the war. And that he died fighting." I twisted my hands together, projecting nervous energy. "There was a photo in her album, but I don't understand why it matters now." "Because James Morrison stole property belonging to the German government," Volker said, his mask slipping slightly. "Property that was never returned to its rightful owners." The irony was staggering. A man whose family had stolen from Holocaust victims was claiming ownership of evidence that would expose their crimes. But I kept my expression neutral, confused. "I don't know anything about stolen property. I just want my grandmother's ring back." Patricia and Volker exchanged glances. In that look, I saw their entire strategy. They believed I was genuinely ignorant, just a useful idiot who could provide legitimacy to their claims. "The ring is being examined by experts," Agent Martinez said. "We need to determine if it contains materials relevant to ongoing historical investigations." Quote, "Historical investigations," Rose's voice murmured in my ear, "is what they're calling the systematic cover-up of war crimes." Agent Martinez's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned, then stepped outside to take a call. Through the observation window, I could see him gesticulating urgently at whoever was on the other end. "Technical difficulties," Volker said with satisfaction. "Dr. Kellerman is very thorough in her work." As if summoned by his words, a woman entered the room. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with prematurely gray hair and intense dark eyes. Dr. Sarah Kellerman carried herself with the precise movements of someone accustomed to handling delicate, valuable objects. "Mr. Volker," she said, her accent placing her origins somewhere in Eastern Europe, "I've completed the preliminary examination." She placed a tablet on the table, displaying high-resolution images of the ring. But something was wrong with the pictures. The center stone looked different. The band appeared to have been altered. "The mechanism is more sophisticated than anticipated," Dr. Kellerman continued. "Whoever designed it understood that forced entry would destroy the contents. But there's another problem." Volker's confidence flickered. "What kind of problem?" "This isn't the original ring." The room went dead silent. Patricia's face was drained of color. What do you mean? She demanded. The craftsmanship is excellent, the materials are correct, but the internal mechanism is a replica, a very good replica, but not the original wartime construction. Dr. Kellerman's fingers moved across the tablet, highlighting details invisible to untrained eyes. Someone replaced the real ring with a copy designed to waste our time. Patricia turned to me with fury building in her eyes. Where is the real ring? I blinked innocently. I don't understand. That's the ring from Rose's jewelry box. Don't lie to me. Patricia's mask finally slipped completely. You switched them somehow. You and that Chinese spy. Patricia, Volker's voice carried a warning edge. Control yourself. But she was past controlling. We've wasted months on this girl, and she's been playing us the entire time. She knows exactly where the real ring is. I swear I don't know what you're talking about, I said, letting my voice rise in pitch. Why would I switch rings? I didn't even know there was anything special about it until Thomas told me. Agent Martinez returned, his expression grim. We have a problem. The warrant for the ring's seizure was issued based on documentation that's now being questioned by federal prosecutors. The paperwork you provided, Mrs. Morrison, contains several irregularities. Volker stood smoothly. I'm sure any irregularities can be resolved through proper channels. I'm sure they can, Agent Martinez said, but until they are, this investigation is suspended pending review. The power dynamic in the room shifted suddenly. Volker and Patricia no longer looked like people running the show. They looked like suspects being investigated. This is ridiculous, Patricia snapped. I provided authentic historical documentation. Documentation that includes forged signatures and fabricated letterheads, Agent Martinez interrupted. Documentation that's part of a pattern of fraud we've been investigating for some time. Through my earpiece, Rose's voice was calm, but triumphant. Phase 2 is beginning. The federal prosecutors received our evidence package 20 minutes ago. Agent Martinez's phone buzzed again. This time, when he answered, his expression grew even more serious. Dr. Kellerman, he said after hanging up, I need you to step outside for a moment. There are some questions about your involvement in this investigation. I don't understand, she said, but her voice carried the first note of uncertainty I'd heard. Neither did I, until we received information about your family history, information suggesting you might not be an impartial expert in this case. Dr. Kellerman's face went pale. My family history is irrelevant to my professional qualifications. It's relevant when you're unknowingly working for people who destroyed your family, Agent Martinez said gently. Dr. Kellerman, we have documentation proving that the Volker family was directly responsible for the seizure of assets belonging to your great-grandmother's family during World War II. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. She looked at Volker with dawning horror. Is this true? Volker's composure finally cracked. The actions of previous generations have no bearing on current legal proceedings. Previous generations? Dr. Kellerman's voice rose. You're Heinrich Volker's son. You've been living off stolen wealth your entire life, and you recruited me to help you steal more. The room erupted in angry voices, but I heard Rose clearly through the chaos. Now, sweetheart, give them the real show. Quote. I stood up slowly, and something in my movement made everyone stop talking. When I spoke, my voice was different, steadier, more confident, carrying an authority I'd never used before. Dr. Kellerman is right about the ring being a replica, I said. I switched them 3 days ago. Patricia's face contorted with rage. I knew it. But she's wrong about one thing, I continued, reaching into my jacket. The real ring isn't hidden somewhere safe. It's right here. I placed my grandmother's wedding ring on the table, the real one, which I'd been wearing on a chain around my neck since Thomas gave it to me. The center stone caught the fluorescent light and threw it back in prismatic colors that seemed almost alive. You see, I said, meeting Volker's horrified gaze, my grandmother taught me that the best way to hide something valuable is to put it exactly where people expect to find it, but in a way they don't recognize. Agent Martinez was staring at the ring. Miss Rodriguez, are you saying you've had the authentic artifact this entire time? I'm saying my grandmother spent 70 years preparing for this moment, and she taught me well. I smiled at Patricia's slack-jawed expression. Did you really think a woman who spent decades as an intelligence operative would keep the real ring in an obvious jewelry box where anyone could steal it? Dr. Kellerman was examining the ring with professional fascination. The mechanism, it's beautiful, but how do we open it safely? We don't, I said. Because we don't need to. I pressed a small section of the band, and it opened with a soft click. Inside, protected by a mechanism that would have made Swiss watchmakers weep with envy, was a tiny compartment containing what looked like a piece of clear plastic. Microfilm, Dr. Kellerman breathed. Microfilm containing 80 years' worth of evidence, I corrected. Evidence my grandmother and her network collected, documenting the Volker family's crimes, their American collaborators, and the location of assets they've been hiding since 1945. Volker lunged for the ring, but Agent Martinez was faster, stepping between us. Mr. Volker, I think you should remain seated. This is entrapment, Patricia shrieked. She's been recording us. This whole thing was a setup. Yes, it was, I said calmly. And yes, I have been recording everything. Every confession, every threat, every admission of criminal activity. Quote, I pulled out the device Thomas had given me, not the dead man's switch, but a recording device that had been broadcasting our conversation to news outlets across 3 continents. For the past hour, journalists in New York, London, Berlin, and Zurich have been listening to Harold Volker admit to living off Nazi gold, and Patricia Morrison confess to decades of fraud and theft. I looked directly at Volker. Your empire ends today. Agent Martinez's phone was ringing constantly now. Through the observation window, I could see federal agents moving with urgent purpose, phones pressed to ears, files being rapidly assembled. The Swiss authorities are freezing Volker's financial accounts as we speak, Agent Martinez announced after answering another call. Mrs. Morrison, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and violation of federal estate laws. As Patricia was handcuffed, she looked at me with pure hatred. You think you've won? You have no idea what forces you're dealing with. The Volker network has connections you can't imagine. Had connections, I corrected. Past tense. Because while you were focused on stealing one ring, Rose's network was documenting your entire operation. Bank records, political payments, evidence of murders disguised as accidents. All of it. Dr. Kellerman was still studying the microfilm with scientific fascination. This will rewrite World War II history. The scope of the financial manipulation. The American collaborators. She looked up at me with new respect. Your grandmother was remarkable. She was, I agreed. And she taught me that justice isn't about revenge. It's about making sure the truth finally comes to light. Agent Martinez stepped forward. Ms. Rodriguez, we'll need you to provide a complete statement about your grandmother's activities and the evidence she collected. Of course. But first there's someone I'd like you to meet. I activated the communication device Father Santos had given me. Rose, they're ready for you. The door opened and my grandmother walked in. She looked exactly as I remembered her, but stronger somehow, more vital. The frailty I'd attributed to age had been performance. The confusion and memory loss carefully orchestrated to make the Volkers believe she was no longer a threat. Hello, Harold, Rose said to Volker with a smile that could have cut glass. I've been looking forward to this conversation for 80 years. Volker stared at her as if seeing a ghost. Impossible. You're dead. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Rose said, settling into a chair with the air of someone who owned the room. Though I did enjoy reading my own obituary. You wrote such lovely things about my contributions to the community. Dr. Kellerman was staring at Rose in awe. You're the legendary Rose Morrison. I studied your wartime operations in graduate school. And now you know why, Rose said kindly. Your great-grandmother, Anna Santos Kellerman, was one of the bravest women I ever knew. She died protecting people like you, people the Volkers would have murdered for their heritage. It's fitting that her great-granddaughter is here to see justice finally served. Agent Martinez cleared his throat. Mrs. Morrison, we'll need to discuss your legal status. I've been in protective custody under federal witness protection for 6 months, Rose interrupted, producing documentation from her purse. Everything I've done has been in cooperation with ongoing federal investigations into war crimes and financial fraud. She handed him a thick folder. You'll find complete documentation of the Volcker network's activities since 1945, including evidence of 17 suspicious deaths, multiple instances of financial fraud, and enough political corruption to keep prosecutors busy for decades. Patricia was being led away in handcuffs, but she turned back to shout one final threat. "This won't end here. You have no idea what you've unleashed." "Actually, I do," I called back. "Rose taught me to always think 3 steps ahead. The network you're so proud of? It stopped existing about an hour ago when simultaneous raids began across 4 countries." As Patricia's protests faded down the hallway, Agent Martinez turned to Rose. "Ma'am, I have to ask, how long have you been planning this operation?" "Since 1943, Rose said simply. "James and I made a pact before he died. If the Volckers ever tried to claim his legacy, we'd make sure they face justice for every crime they'd committed. It just took me 79 years to get all the pieces in position." Dr. Kellerman was carefully packaging the microfilm for analysis. "This evidence, it's going to destroy some very powerful people." "Good," Rose said firmly. "Powerful people who built their power on stolen gold and murdered witnesses. It's time for accountability." 6 months later, I stood in the same federal building, but this time for a very different purpose. The Volcker network had collapsed completely. Harold Volcker died of a heart attack while being arrested in Switzerland, and Patricia was serving a 20-year sentence for fraud and conspiracy. Dr. Kellerman had become something of a celebrity in academic circles, using her expertise to help identify and repatriate stolen Nazi artifacts to their rightful owners. We'd become close friends, bonded by shared heritage and a mutual appreciation for Rose's complex planning. "The Santos Kellerman Foundation is officially operational," she told me, handing over incorporation papers. "Thanks to recovered Volcker assets, we'll be able to help victims of historical injustices for generations to come." Rose, looking healthier than she had in years, was already making plans for the Foundation's first initiatives. "We'll start with families whose assets were never returned after the war, then expand to other historical injustices. It's what James would have wanted." I was wearing the ring again, properly this time, as a symbol of everything my family had survived and overcome. The microfilm had been safely archived with multiple institutions, ensuring the truth could never be buried again. "Any regrets?" Rose asked as we walked out of the federal building together. "Just one," I said. "I wish I'd known the real you sooner." "You knew me, sweetheart. The love was real, the lessons were real, the grandmother who raised you was real. I just had more layers than you realized." Rose smiled. "Besides, you turned out exactly as I hoped. Strong enough to stand up to bullies, smart enough to outthink them, and kind enough to use your victory to help others." A year later, I opened the morning newspaper to find a headline that made me smile. "Santos Kellerman Foundation helps reunite 1,000 families with stolen heritage." Below it was a photo of Dr. Kellerman and me at our latest repatriation ceremony, returning artwork and artifacts to families across Europe. The ring on my finger caught the morning light, no longer a burden or a mystery, but a reminder of the price of justice and the power of patience. James had hidden his secrets well, but Rose had hidden hers better. And together, they'd taught me that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's making sure the truth survives long enough to matter. Patricia's threats had proven empty. The Volcker network was gone, their stolen wealth redistributed to victims' families, their political connections severed by scandal and prosecution. Evil that had festered for 80 years was finally exposed to light, and it had withered accordingly. But the most important lesson Rose taught me wasn't about defeating enemies or exposing conspiracies. It was about building something lasting from pain, something that honored the dead by helping the living, something that turned a story of loss into a legacy of hope. The ring would pass to my children someday, but they'd inherit more than just jewelry. They'd inherit the knowledge that sometimes ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things, that justice delayed isn't always justice denied, and that love, real love, prepares us for battles we don't even know we'll have to fight. James Morrison died, protecting secrets that could change the world. Rose Morrison lived to see those secrets transform the world for the better. And I gotta help make it happen, one recovered treasure at a time. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.